Welcome to our workshop. I love this workshop. The reason that I love this workshop is that I know it's going to be a win-win-win. So either you or somebody you know is struggling with sleep issues, and all the material that we're going to cover tonight is going to be so useful that you are going to then have the best night's sleep ever once you start to implement the suggestions that we're going to give you. On the other hand, if I do a terrible job and I bore you and you end up falling asleep because of it, well, at least you're getting some sleep. So that would be a win as well. All right, so fair enough. It's a win both ways. So here we go. And I want to first admit to you that this particular issue, sleep, is one that I have struggled with myself. This is my Achilles heel. And it is because of how much I want to get done in a day. Anybody else had that problem where you go home at night and start the second part of your day because you've got these projects that you just want to get done? Even if you're passionate about those projects, if it starts cramping in on your sleep time, it's going to affect your health. So I want to share with you the best practices of how to get the best night's sleep. And I want to just start by looking at what all the details are here around this subject. So first off, proper amounts of sleep actually on a consistent basis are going to add to your health. It actually helps with anti-aging, with anti-inflammation. It prevents mood disorders and dementia. It promotes a healthy BMI. Can you believe it? It actually helps with the shape of your body, right? Your body mass index. It actually is protective for neurodegenerative diseases. It protects against arthritis. It supports your immune system. It's cardioprotective, anti-carcinogenic, and musculoskeletal injury preventative. Can you believe that? Getting good sleep actually prevents you from having musculoskeletal injuries. And we're going to unpack that so you'll understand why. Some other interesting things, humans, we should be getting about half of our life should be sleeping, right? Half of our lifetime should be spent sleeping. For cats, about 2/3 of their lifetime is spent sleeping. So every species has a different demand or requisite for sleep, and for humans, it should be about, actually not half, a third of our sleep time. So if we look at a 24-hour clock in a day, 8 hours, 1/3 of it should be sleeping. And if we look at our lifetime, that applies. 1/3 of our lifetime is for sleeping. So if you think about that, the programming in how important sleep is, when you think of Paleolithic man living in the wild, sleep would put you at a vulnerability. Right? Wild animals come up, enemies can come up, but sleep is so important that we literally knock ourselves out so we're unconscious, so that for 1/3 of our 24-hour cycle, because it is so essential to our health. And most other species on the planet need some degree of sleep as well. Some other interesting statistics: divorced, widowed, and separated people report more insomnia. And so if your relationships are not up to speed, that could be contributing and to trouble with sleeping. Sleep deprivation, listen to this, sleep deprivation will kill you more quickly than food deprivation. So it's even more important than eating, sleep is. Sleep is just as important as diet and exercise as far as what our cells demand of us. And ideally, falling asleep at night should take you 10 to 15 minutes. So you lay down, put your head on the pillow. Within 10 to 15 minutes, you should be going to sleep. If that's not happening for you, that means something needs to change. There needs to be something that's going to help you do better at your sleep. And I will tell you that 36%, that's 1 in 3 Americans, actually are driving drowsy or fall asleep while driving. Holy smokes. On the road, 1 in every 3 person you're encountering is going to be a little drowsy or even has had the experience of falling asleep while driving. So according to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, about 40 million people in the United States struggle with sleep issues, and suffering from chronic long-term sleep disorders in a year is a big problem, chronically. An additional 20 million people experience occasional sleep problems. So that is a huge segment of our population. And so here you are on this webinar tonight because you yourself are struggling. And maybe you even know other people that also are struggling. So I hope the information that we're going to share with you tonight, if you find it useful, please share it with other people, because this has a big impact on our health. And again, if you're one of these people, you know what a nightmare it is to not get good sleep. Aside from tossing and turning, stiffness in your neck and back, racing thoughts, sleepwalking, restless legs, all of those different things, you're going to be not only suffering from these problems at night, but if you do suffer from them, a bad night of sleep is going to affect you and give you problems during the day. And so one of those problems is going to be that your energy is going to be tanking, right? Your battery is nearly on empty. And no energy is bad enough, because I know you've got things to do, but it can result in you perhaps being more irritable with your family, with your kids, with your spouse, with your boss, with your coworkers, and that's going to cause problems in those relationships. Maybe you've turned to running your life on caffeine, which makes it even more difficult to sleep later. So that's a short-term strategy that doesn't turn into a good long-term strategy. You're going to be skipping all the fun activities because you're just too tired to participate. You're going to feel fatigued, like you're running on empty, having trouble concentrating, having bags under your eyes, losing your train of thought, experiencing brain fog. I'm just getting tired thinking about all these things, right? So there are other serious complications as well to losing sleep, and we're going to talk about those tonight. But first, let's take a look at some of the more common patient presentations or problems that we help patients with every day. Sleep issues such as sleep apnea, thoracic outlet syndrome, restless leg syndrome. And of course, there's also just the social aspects of the modern day that disrupt our sleep patterns. So we're going to cover that as well. But first, let's set the table before we eat. Let's just recognize that poor sleep is a symptom. Sleep issues are a symptom. And this is just part of a whole series of webinars that we do on different conditions every month. And so tonight we're talking about sleep because it is affecting people's health so much. But again, sleep problems as symptoms. Well, what exactly are symptoms? Symptoms are communications from your body. It is your body reaching out with a certain language, trying to tell you that something needs to change, that you are moving away from health. And depending on what we do with these communications, depending on how we respond, will tell us, again, what our outcomes are going to be. So your smart body is trying to tell you you need to change something, right? Is that a smart body or a stupid body? Boy, that's a smart system, to have an alert system telling you when you need to make a change. And so we know that our bodies are smart, that it's trying to tell us something. And so we like to call symptoms body signals. And if we call them body signals, we start to think about them in a different way. And we think about them as something that we actually could do something about. So depending on how you deal with them, do you listen and respond and make changes? Do you stop damaging your body and start healing your body? Or do you just try to ignore them and press on, which is what our culture tends to program us to do? Come on, just buck up, just keep going, right? Maybe it'll go away. That's a common phrase people use to just manage the current moment. Oh, maybe it'll just go away, right? Or, oh, it's just part of aging. You know, when people get older, they just don't sleep as well. How many people have heard that, right? Yeah, not true, not true. And definitely something to pay attention to. And there's all kinds of stories that we tell ourselves that actually get in the way of us doing something about the issues that actually are affecting our health, not just in the short term, but also can lead to long-term consequences. And even worse than that, are you just stifling these signals, these symptoms with medications, with drugs, and these dangerous chemicals that really only suppress your body's communications, so that you might sleep better or feel better temporarily, but meanwhile your problem is actually getting worse? Is that smart or stupid, right? So who's ready to learn a better way? Symptoms or body signals, they're only the tip of the iceberg. That's why we have this image here. I love this image, right? The way that you think about your symptoms is going to drive your choices, and that's what's going to drive your outcomes. So if you are ignoring the underlying cause and allowing it to become a bigger issue, it's going to be a problem, bigger problem in the long run. So let's talk about symptoms and gain a new perspective on symptoms and their role and how important they actually are for us. So we're not into ignoring symptoms, we're into paying attention to them. And why is that? Because symptoms are telling you, and what direction you're headed. So if you look at this scale here, this range, we see on the left-hand side of this illness-wellness continuum, the left-hand side is premature death, right? Early death. And the right-hand side is high levels of wellness. What you'll notice is right in the middle, this neutral point, this is where you're not necessarily sick with symptoms, but you're not necessarily at that robust level of wellness and health that you want to be at. And so what we notice with this wellness paradigm is that as you move in the direction of losing function and losing health, the first thing that shows up is signs and then symptoms. So symptoms, if you're starting to notice symptoms, you're already a third or two-thirds of the way moving in the direction towards disability and early death. And so insomnia would be a symptom. Even if you're trying to manage it with medications, if that's what you're dependent on, that is not meaning that your function is at this improved level. It's actually just managing it at this level, which means you may still be moving in this direction, because what we find from this study is that nobody is standing still. Everybody's going to be somewhere on this range, and nobody's standing still. Everybody's going to be moving in one direction or the other. And that direction will be determined by the sum of your lifestyle choices. So if you're making healthy lifestyle choices, you're going to be moving towards robust health. If the sum of your choices are poor, you're going to be moving from signs to symptoms. And when you're not addressing symptoms well anymore, that turns into disability where you can't help those symptoms anymore. So I want you to understand this, because so many people are actually thinking that symptoms are their best indicator of health. And right here at the neutral point in the middle, where there are no symptoms, that's a false sense of wellness, right? So there are three ranges here. There is the sick range, there is the not sick range, and there's the healthy range. And most people are actually living in the not sick zone and calling it healthy, when actually it's already away from, and maybe the direction they're heading is even further and faster towards more and more disability or more and more symptoms, less and less function. So sometimes my first job when I work with people is to just just slow down the momentum in this direction and start moving people slowly and then more quickly in the direction they want to move towards, which is that optimal level of function. So I go into this because I want people to recognize that there are premises that we're using that are actually adding to the problems that we have. So if we think that symptoms are the best way to address as an indicator of our health, really, is that the best way to think about it? Let's just take a look at that, because when we think of symptoms, right, well, let me ask you this. What do you think is the early warning sign, early symptom for heart disease? Right? The earliest signs of heart disease are no symptoms at all, right? What about cancer? Same thing. The earliest signs are no symptoms at all. Diabetes, what does diabetes feel like in the beginning? No symptoms, right? There are signs, we can measure things, but oftentimes people discover they have heart disease or they discover they have diabetes from a blood test, not from how they feel. So a symptom is something you feel, a sign is something you can measure. So measuring the signs actually comes before the symptoms when we're looking at the loss of function. So rather than depending on how you feel, I'd like to introduce a better series of premises that are actually going to lead you toward greater levels of health. And so who's with me here? Who would like a better definition of health than just the absence of symptoms? Because remember, right here, you've got an absence of symptoms, but that's different from robust health. All right, so the better premise I'd love to share with you first is that healthy is normal. Healthy is normal, right? Who's with me on that, right? Healthy is normal, and your body is smart, right? We already talked about that. Your body is smart. It'll even give you body signals when you need to make a change. So our body is smart. It was designed to be healthy. Our nervous system is the master system in our entire body that controls every other function. And our spine is what protects the nervous system. So we have this suit of armor that is protecting our nervous system. Our skull protects our brain, and our spinal column protects our nervous system and our spinal cord. And so we have that suit of armor to protect us. Now, the last premise that we want to recognize is that modern life is stressful. It is unnaturally stressful. We were never designed to be actually functioning at the level of stresses that we have today. And so that is a very important piece that we need to reconcile. And if we're not reconciling it, if we are calling the levels of stress that we have today, if we're calling that normal, then we're going to be in trouble. So we have to recognize that and figure out how do we reconcile it. Because I promise you, living unnaturally in our modern world, right, that is what's causing the major stresses that we have. So modern life is awesome. It's incredible in so many ways, and it's divergent, it's different, but it's not what we're designed for, right? So we have tools that we can use, or they can be abusive if we don't use them the right way. So we certainly are not eating the way we were designed to eat. We are not moving the way we were designed to move. We don't think the way we were designed to think. And we definitely do not sleep the way that we were designed to sleep. Modern life is unnatural, and more specifically, it is unnaturally stressful. So just think about it. Ask yourself, today, do you have more stress than you had 5 years ago? I would say everybody here has more stress even from last year, right? This year has been the most stressful that human beings on the planet have ever experienced. And again, what direction is that going to be pushing you in, right? And technology definitely has an impact on sleep. In fact, last month we covered the topic of neck pain, and before that, headaches, right? And so headaches and neck pain are associated with technology use, right? From tech neck. Everybody's heard of tech neck syndrome, right? That's the use of devices that's affecting our neck. Well, those same devices actually will be affecting our sleep and causing more stress. So remember that that stress is coming at us from every angle. And so it's not just the thoughts, our thought life that can be stressful, emotional stress, mental stress, but also toxins are a stress to our system. Traumas are a stress to our system, as is the physical stress of a sedentary lifestyle, another category. And so we have these 3 T's, toxins, traumas, and thoughts, that are all the ways that we are being stressed in our modern day world. And every one of these will have a huge impact on our quality and our quantity of sleep. So let's now unpack this whole idea of sleep, and let's examine what high-level physiology of sleep really looks like. Let's unpack this a bit. So I like to geek out on this a little bit before I go into the solutions, because here's what I found. As I said, for me, sleep actually has been an Achilles heel. So if I have bad habits around sleep, the only way that I can really change a bad habit is I have to dive into it. I have to learn about it so that I can change my belief system about it. Because before I dive into it, I think to myself, oh, this project, getting this done is going to be more beneficial than, oh, just getting some extra sleep. So I'll do okay if I can miss some sleep so that I can get this project done, right? That's the story that I would tell myself until I started to do the research. And once I dove into it and I saw what the research showed, right? Now I'm at a point where I know too much, right? I know too much to not have sleep be a prime quality of life issue, right? It's prime. It trumps everything else now. And so I do everything I can to get the best sleep possible as often as I can. I'm still not 100% at it, but as I say, progress, not perfection. So I want to give you what the best practices are, but I want you to understand it first, because once you understand it, then it's going to motivate you to make those changes that we all need to make. So first off, let's just recognize that there's a relationship between the rhythms of how the sun and light affects us, how eating affects us, and how sleep affects us. And there's a rhythm of how they're all related. So when we have the exposure of light and the sun coming into our eyes, it actually even impacts not just the glands in the middle of the head through the eyes, like the pituitary, but also the light and the rhythm of the day can affect another gland called the pineal gland. And that's deep set right in the deepest part of the brain, but it actually does sense light. And when these glands are activated, they will then now have an influence on the organs, on liver function and digestion, on kidney function, and the steroids, the adrenal glands, and the corticosteroids and the hormones in our bodies. So The autonomic nervous system is what controls all the organs. That will actually be influenced by these glands up in our brain. And then those glands or organs are going to then send hormones up that will then impact brain function. So there's a cycle that happens here. And light is one of the factors that will impact this cycle. And if it's a healthy cycle, then it affects all of our body. All of our organs are going to be in a healthier state if this cycle is being honored. It's going to affect our body temperature, our food, our activity levels. All of that is going to be affected by this cycle. All right, so let's now jump right in and understand how this cycle of light and sleep and hormones and function, how it all relates. So we do have this rhythm that happens, which is our circadian rhythms. And in humans, it is a 24-hour clock that we're looking at. So you can see midnight is at the top here, and then at the bottom is 12 noon, midday. So this is not a 12-hour clock we're looking at, it's a 24-hour clock. And so if we look at what happens as the sun goes down, that's going to be right around 7 o'clock or so, we could say. And of course, it'll vary depending on what your latitude is. But we do know that our body temperature is highest right in the evening. And then right around 9 o'clock or so, that's when melatonin secretion starts. So melatonin is our sleep hormone. Melatonin is what now downregulates cortisol, which is our awake hormone, our action hormone, even our stress hormone. And they work kind of in a yin-yang form where foot on the gas, foot on the brake. So the melatonin is what's going to increase as the night wears on. So right around 9 o'clock, that starts to increase. And our best time to be making sure we're going to bed is no later than 10 p.m. because what that will do is start to get us into a deeper sleep right around 11 o'clock. And 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock are the most important hours to be asleep, even right up into 2 a.m. because that's what sets us up for our deepest sleep, right around 2 a.m. Then around 4:30, our lowest body temperature happens. And so we have our highest body temperature as we are getting ready to go to sleep, and then our lowest body temperature as we're getting ready to wake up. And then we have daylight, right? The sun starts to come out, and at 6:45, we tend to have the sharpest blood pressure rise. So that's because cortisol starts to show up, and that starts to increase our blood pressure and gets us ready for action, gets us ready for the day. Melatonin secretion starts to turn down as the early morning starts to move into the mid-morning. And then at 10 a.m., we have highest cortisol levels. That's our highest alertness levels. By noon, right, we're at peak performance. And 2:30, we're at best levels of coordination in our body. At 3:30, we have our fastest reaction time. And at 5 p.m., our greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength. And then at 6 p.m., the sun starts to go down. We have our highest levels of blood pressure. And then we are back into the cycle again, where we go round and round here. And so the light impacts our hormonal rhythms and our cycles, and that then influences how our body is functioning. So in the ancient lifestyle, this is our genetic design. And so this is kind of different from modern life, right? Because in modern life, right, we might get up early in the morning, we go to work, and then the sun goes down and we get home from work, and now the second part of our day starts. Next thing you know, we've got the lights on, so we still have light coming into our brain, and our body thinks, oh, it's still light out, so we're going to stay awake. And especially when we get blue light coming from screens and LED lighting, right, that actually signals cortisol to stay high. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in another slide, but I want you to just see how us adding the second part of our day into the evening time is one of the things that is driving poor sleep. All right, so remember that we have certain wavelengths that our brain goes into, and there's actually 90-minute cycles that we go through in a night. And we actually go through about 5. We need to go through about 5 of these 90-minute cycles. So in the beginning, like when we're just starting to fall asleep, we call it the twilight state, kind of between wake and sleep. That's when we have high alpha brain waves running. And then that slows down into a deep delta sleep where we have a deep sleep. That's when the most healing happens. So if our body has an injury and needs to heal up, we need to have that deep sleep or that deep, that slower rhythm. And then finally, it's kind of elevates slightly and we go into frequencies that will trigger the REM, the rapid eye movement sleep, the dreaming state. And that's also very important for integrating everything that has happened during the day. Now we have this natural cycle, as we talked about, of the different hormones. So I want to show you this natural cortisol cycle. Cortisol is often thought of as the stress hormone, so sometimes it gets a bad rap, but we really need to have cortisol during certain times of the day so that we are able to be active and moving. And so the natural rhythm for cortisol is that when the sun is high, then that's when our cortisol is going to be high. And then as the sun drops, our cortisol levels drop. We get into evening and we should have low cortisol levels. And those low levels are when we're sleeping and the melatonin is strong. So melatonin is going to be the opposite peak. So it's going to peak at the night and it's going to drop down and be low during the day and so on. And so we want to have the right cortisol cycles in the body. But what happens is sometimes if we have cortisol, which is a stress hormone, if you're one of those people that goes to sleep at night and you're just thinking and you're stressing out about things, it means your cortisol levels are going to stay high, so that instead of dropping down, they just kind of stay high right along here. Next thing you know, it's daytime and cortisol levels are high, but now you're getting exhausted because you're not getting good sleep. So your cortisol levels get actually fatigued, and so you might actually have an overall static level of cortisol morning and night instead of having a rhythm to it. And that will have an impact on our physiology. And it's so dramatically different from what our natural design is, that ancient design. It was to have these cycles. And modern life is driving this situation where our cortisol levels are staying high at night. And there's definitely a negative impact that's going to occur from this. So one of the negative impacts is that growth hormone is going to be impacted. And so growth hormone is what is HGH, human growth hormone. It's secreted during healthy sleep, and it's one of the things that stimulates cell repair, cell growth, and cell generation. And so that's one of the things that's important for our ability to heal if we've had injuries. But it's also about just allowing us to recover from exercise, tissue repair, but also growth. So for children, good sleep is so important because they have to go through these growth cycles. And if they are not getting good sleep, it will interfere with their developmental windows that they have to go through and their growth. So there's a certain kind of hormonal reboot that occurs when we sleep. And growth hormone is what is secreted during that slow wave of sleep that we talked about. And it also has a lot of impact and benefit on our mood and our cognition, and it affects our neuronal health, so the nervous system as well as the hormones. And really, if we get good sleep, it's the most powerful anti-aging and cellular regenerator treatment in the world. So people are looking at all kinds of secret ways of supplements that they could take, or exercise, or meditation, but it turns out that actually sleep is one of the most important things that we can do. It also affects our immune system, and it will affect very quickly on our aging, premature aging, and our health in general, because when you don't get good sleep, sleep deprivation, it's going to tank the human growth hormone. So just remember that when we sleep, our brain actually goes to the gym when we're sleeping, and it is at that time that we are packaging and recording in the memories of the day so that we then have future success. So that's that cognitive piece there. And just think about it, you know, people really work hard at getting good nutrition or good exercise. But if you're not getting good sleep, it's kind of like, you know, giving good nutrition to someone who's a couch potato, right? Without the good exercise, the good nutrition is going to be not as effective. And it's the same thing with good sleep. Good sleep is just as important as good nutrition and good exercise. So let's now look closely at cortisol here. So what happens with cortisol? Cortisol is, again, if we think of it as the stress hormone, what we mean by that is that when you're exposed to a stress, because that is what's going to help you go into fight or flight mode, and if that stress was a tiger, it would be what would save your life. So when stress hormone is produced, cortisol would being that one. It actually is a self-promoting mechanism, meaning that when you have high levels of stress hormones, it actually pushes the production of even more stress hormones, and that will interfere with sleep. Cortisol and melatonin levels, they are together control sodium levels. And so when melatonin is downregulated because cortisol is staying high, what happens is it actually impacts our sodium levels, and that's one of the things that can drive blood pressure to stay high. So as we saw in the circadian rhythms, there's a certain time of the day when we do want that blood pressure to go up, but then we want it to go down over time. And if the cortisol levels stay high during the night, it means blood pressure overall is going to start to creep up. What also happens is insulin sensitivity gets downregulated. So basically, if we're fighting a tiger, we want to have that blood sugar high because the blood sugar is what's available for energy in the muscles or wherever we need it in the body. And so high cortisol levels are going to drive that insulin, which is going to cause the blood sugar to go up. And it's also going to weaken connective tissues. And that will then break down the joints, and soft tissues will make you wrinkled and saggy. So this is where a weakening in connective tissues can lead to increased musculoskeletal injuries. All right, so you're watching what's happening here. If you don't get good sleep, not only are you sick and tired, but you're wrinkled as well, right? It's also going to affect our immune system. It's going to downregulate that immune system. And the reason is because the immune system is a very expensive system to run in our body. And so when we are at fight or flight mode and peak demand, we're fighting the tiger right now, we want to put all of our resources into fighting that tiger. So we're going to downregulate the immune system to save that for later, so that if we have injuries, we're going to be able to then repair those injuries and recover. But the immune system is downregulated when we're in that fight or flight mode because it was never meant to last very long. It was supposed to be 15 seconds, maybe 15 minutes running away from that tiger. By that time, you're either lunch or you've gotten away, and then the cortisol levels should be then coming down. In our modern, unnaturally stressful world, those cortisol levels are just staying too high for too long, and it's affecting our health. The other thing that will happen is inflammation and swelling actually will be promoted from high cortisol levels. Again, the healing doesn't have a chance to occur because of that high stress level. Now, what are the things that will cause chronically elevated cortisol? It's going to be certainly the chronic psychological stress and sleep deprivation, as we've said, but also limited exertion is one of the things that's going to drive that high cortisol as well. And so if you're not exercising, chances are, can you see how this is a downward spiral? That if you are not getting enough sleep, now you're exhausted, and the last thing you want to do is go and exercise. So now you're not moving your body very much, and so you're not going to be able to reboot the hormones. So the things that will reboot the hormones are good sleep and good exercise. So burst exertion exercise, I mean where you're panting and sweating, that kind of exercise will actually help to make the body physically tired, so that when it's time to go to sleep, your body physically actually is ready to sleep. If we're not moving our bodies enough during the day, when it's time to sleep, we're actually not physically tired because we haven't put enough demand on our body. Our bodies were designed to move all day long, hunting and gathering and taking care of ourselves so we can stay alive. But in our modern world, we're not putting that physical demand. So now it's time to go to sleep, and we're not actually physically tired. And in fact, what we're doing is thinking about all the stresses in the day that didn't go away just because it's time to sleep. They're going to be there again tomorrow. And so we start to have that stress thinking along with the body that's just not tired. And that coupled together, we have a perfect storm here of limited exertion, chronic psychological stress, and sleep deprivation that is just going to drive that cortisol to those levels where it's going to start affecting our health. And it not only affects our health, it's going to affect our brain. And so this is really an important part of the effects of sleep deprivation. Lack of sleep is actually causing parts of the brain to slow or shut down completely. And so it's going to affect our attention, our working memory, our long-term memory, our decision-making. Those executive functions are going to be affected. And even just acute sleep deprivation definitely affects our vigilance and our attention, as well as our long-term memory. So good nutrition without good sleep, Again, it's like good nutrition for couch potatoes because it's going to just start to affect our brain function. Let's check out what chronic sleep deprivation, how it impacts us over time. So first of all, again, it's a physiological aspect. It's not just a mental and cognitive function that's being affected, but the unnatural schedules that we have are upsetting our cortisol cycles, our melatonin is getting downregulated, our insulin sensitivity is getting downregulated, but the unnatural lighting, which is part of what's causing our sleep deprivation, it actually affects our function because it affects hormones. Leptin is our appetite hormone. And actually, we would call it our hunger hormone, right? So when leptin levels are going down, actually, I'm sorry, ghrelin is our hunger hormone. So when ghrelin goes up, we're more hungry, our appetite goes up. And when we have light all the time, our bodies are basically thinking of the way a bear would think of in summertime. So a bear in the summer, that's the time when we have light many more hours, and that triggers the body to say, okay, now is the time for us to gather lots and lots of calories and store them. So we'll go into fat storage mode so that in the darker part of the year, we're going to be going into to fat burning to sustain us through the winter. And so what happens when we have unnatural lighting where we're having the light all the time or late into the evening is our ghrelin levels are going to go up, causing our appetite to go up, and our leptin, which is our satiation hormone, meaning I've had enough to eat, that goes down, which means that keeps our appetite up. Cortisol tends to drive carb cravings because remember, if a tiger is chasing you, you want to have that blood sugar. And so you're going to go after the carbs as that quick energy that would allow you to fight the tiger and keep fighting the tiger. So we'll tend to crave carbs when we're more stressed. Anybody notice that happening? Right? Exactly. And then again, because our insulin levels, the sensitivity goes down, it means we're going to go into more fat storage. So insulin means more fat storage. So when we look at how all of this is showing up, can you see how this can actually lead to type 2 diabetes? So sleep deprivation actually will start to affect our blood chemistry. In fact, missing one night's sleep, you can have the same blood profile as a pre-diabetic the next day. And in 3 days of poor sleep, you actually have the blood profile of diabetes. And the result of it is that it actually is going to then bring us into belly fat. So remember we said that it could affect our BMI, right? And so the way that this works is that, remember, if you think of our ancestors, they may have had a lot of acute short-term stresses, like a tiger showing up or an enemy, or here comes bad weather that you have to deal with, right? But the only chronic stress that our ancestors had was famine. That was the only chronic stress that our ancestors had. Well, nowadays we have chronic stress and our body is going to go into, oh, if this is chronic stress, must be famine, we better go into fat storage mode. And so that's why chronic stress is related to belly fat. So sleep deprivation, which drives those high cortisol levels, contributes to belly fat. It contributes to fat storage mode. Chronic low-grade stress and sleep deprivation are going to elevate the cortisol, and that again triggers that centripetal fat, that's fat storage for survival, belly fat. So I know you guys love doing those burpees and working out as hard as you can and strict dieting, but imagine if the solution to your unwanted body fat was actually just simply better sleep. Wow, everybody, hands up if you're actually, wouldn't that be a fantastic solution? And I want you to make sure that you start to incorporate this. If you're not happy with you having that ideal body, then sleep is definitely a key factor that you want to be addressing. So what are the best practices for getting the best sleep? You want to use the circadian rhythm as a guide. So when the sun goes down, that's when it's time to start thinking about going to sleep. And then when the sun comes up, that's when it's time to start thinking about being active in our day. So people that have, for example, night work, right? You're working through the night. You've got that graveyard shift, as they call it, right? Yeah, that is not a good sustained long-term practice. And I hope that you can make a change as soon as possible and get yourself out of that situation, because it's not going to be good over the long term. I actually had a good friend who was also my midwife, when my daughter was born. And she was someone that I looked at as someone who had very, very healthy lifestyle practices. She was one of the people that I looked up to as far as, here's somebody that's got it nailed as far as doing healthy practices. And she ended up getting breast cancer. And I asked her when she was actually, I took care of her throughout, even as she was dying. And I was quite honored to be able to serve in that role. But I asked her, like, what do you think is going on? Why would someone like you get breast cancer when you live such a healthy life? And she said to me, I think it's because as a midwife, I could never actually get the good sleep that I needed. And so there are studies that do show that poor sleep actually, as we said, good sleep is anti-carcinogenic, which means that poor sleep can drive cancer issues. So getting good sleep is so important. And again, using the circadian rhythm as your guide, right? So that's important. Looking at shooting for 8 to 9 hours of sleep. So some people are going to use a tool to measure that, a Fitbit or any kind of, the technology we have where you can wear it on your body and it can measure what is actually happening with your sleep cycles. I think it's good information to get. I'm not sure I'm a fan of wearing those things all night long on your body, but at least getting an idea of what's actually happening, getting some information from it may be useful. We want to actually create the perfect sleep environment. So having it be dark, quiet, and comfortable is really important, right? Think about a cave, a dark cave with a nice warm fire going, right, to keep it warm. Then the fire goes out and now it's dark, quiet, and comfortable. And then think about an e-fast. What I mean by an e-fast is a fast from or shutting down the electronics before you go to bed. And the best practice is we want to look at least 30 minutes before you go to bed, but that means no screens, no electronics for 30 minutes before you go to bed. But I find that some people, they really need to look at even 90 minutes before they go to bed to just get all the electronics off. And so when you look at like how to have good energy during the day, it starts with the night before. Now, for some of you that just have demands on you where you have to work with your screens later than you want to, you can actually use blue blocker light glasses. So you can get very unsophisticated ones, which are actually used as safety glasses that have the orange coloring to their lenses, or you can get very sophisticated ones. But in our house, when the sun goes down, our blue light blockers go on so that we can just protect those hormone levels so that our melatonin is not compromised and our cortisol levels can start to go down. If you have a family and you have kids, sometimes it's fun to just play with, what if we just don't turn the lights on? What if we use candles or a fireplace light as the sun goes down? And then that's going to actually really help with just calming our bodies down and getting the melatonin to come up and the cortisol to turn down. So an e-fast is a really important thing to consider with your rhythms. The science definitely shows that if you're going to have less sleep time, the best time to actually get the sleep in is going to be from the deep sleep from 11 to 1. So that means going to bed by 10. So even if you think, okay, I've got work to do, should I just stay up and get it done and then go to sleep, even though I'm only going to have 4 or 5 hours of sleep? And actually the best practice there would be actually go to bed at 10 o'clock, get your 4 or 5 hours in and wake up early, and then put in that extra work time. Reducing alcohol and caffeine is also going to be a best practice because the caffeine may keep you up too late because you're still stimulated. And the alcohol, although people use it to try and get sleep, it really interferes with liver function, which is important for us getting the proper sleep. And so over time, alcohol is not going to be a good practice, a good solution. Finally, we have to think about a household culture, right? We want to have a household culture. Everybody in the household is in the same, going to sleep at the same time, and we're having morning glories and night owls in the same household can be really tricky. So if you're going to drink alcohol, you want to drink it earlier in the day, and you want to drink early, sleep more, and remember we said exercise is important, right? So for some people, they can even get some exercise right before they go to sleep, if you know what I mean. And so, wow, what if this was actually the solution to getting the best night's sleep possible, right? It's all within reach here. Now, I also want to just look at this idea that the sleep issues that I encounter in the practice oftentimes are coming from some other types of of patient presentations or symptoms. And so I want to address these because not sleeping well because of sleep apnea or thoracic outlet syndrome, which we'll talk about, restless legs, or even just having pain interfering with your sleep is going to affect your ability to heal as well. And so I want to, let's just recap here what happens. So when we look at the spine and the nervous system, remember the brain is in charge of running everything in the body. It sends the messages down the spinal cord and then out through the nerves to go to every part of the body, which is controlling all of the organs. And so we really think of the spine like a circuit breaker. And so the messages, as long as the messages travel from the brain out to the different rooms in the house or the different organ systems without interference, you get to be healthy. But if something starts to interfere with that, then we're going to see a breakdown in function. And so I wanted to show you how important this suit of armor is, the spine is, because it's what's keeping the flow of messages clear. And when the flow of messages is clear between the brain and the body, that's when we'll have optimum function. And so remember that if we really are going to have a healthy body, we have to have a healthy nervous system. And if we want a healthy nervous system, we need to have a healthy spine, because the body actually is self-regulating and self-healing, right? Remember we said healthy is normal, the body is smart, the nervous system is the master system, right? But if something is interfering with the flow of messages between the brain and the body, that's when we're going to start to see a breakdown in function. And we call this interference a subluxation. So a subluxation is where there's going to be a misalignment in the joints in the spine, and that misalignment can actually cause some soft tissue damage. The soft tissue damage causes inflammation, and then there's going to start to be nerve irritation. So remember, in the spine, these nerves are coming out from between the bones of the spine, and if the vertebrae misalign, it can actually start to put pressure on the nerves. When that happens, that nerve irritation will create a spasm, because if you have nerve irritation anytime you move that joint, the body's gonna, your smart body is gonna strap down that joint with muscle spasms to try and stop the nerve irritation. When that joint fixation happens and you no longer have normal motion in that joint, the signaling going up to the brain actually says, wait, if there's not normal motion there, there must be a problem. And that actually drives cortisol levels up because it increases stress hormone production. Basically, the brain says if there's not normal movement, then that is a problem in the body. And it goes into a global stress response, meaning high cortisol levels. So subluxations can be one of the things that is driving the high cortisol levels that are then interfering with sleep. And that's why many people, when they get their subluxations corrected, they start to talk about how, wow, I am getting the best night's sleep I've ever had. People will come in and literally, like, their cortisol levels have been high, and we understand what that means if cortisol levels are high. We've already gone through this. It increases stress hormones, down-regulates the melatonin, increases blood pressure, down-regulates insulin, weakens connective tissues, the immune system gets down-regulated, the inflammation, swelling gets upregulated, increased, right? All those things can happen. So when someone approaches me and they have a concern about sleep apnea, I want to show you how that relates to the nervous system, right? So sleep apnea is where when someone is sleeping, if you've ever slept next to somebody that has sleep apnea and you're a light enough sleeper yourself or you're awake when you're near them, they are breathing and all of a sudden they start to snore, and then next thing you know, all of a sudden they're not breathing. And then there's a little bit of time and all of a sudden there's a big snore and they take a breath again. So what happens is there's inflammation that happens right around the sinuses and the back of the throat, the upper palate. There's inflammation and there's a laxity that happens there. And that can be compounded by obesity. And obesity, as you know, is one of the factors that, maybe you don't know this, but it actually drives chronic inflammation. So when there's chronic inflammation, again, the tissues in this whole area can stay inflamed, which means they're swelled. And that swelling means it decreases the airway, the diameter of the airway. And then the other factor can be a loss in the curve in the spine. If we lose the curve in the spine, the nerve supply to these tissues gets impaired, and so the brain is not controlling them well. And again, there's going to be a lack of function there. Laying down, again, just from gravity, if there's a laxity and there's inflammation, is going to affect that as well. And there's just going to be a more turbulent airflow with all these factors. And again, that's that snoring and sleep apnea that can occur. But remember that there actually is a correlation with apnea and heart disease and stroke. And it's the same as the correlation between obesity and these factors as well. And all of it can be compounded by some subluxation. And subluxation as well as an inflammatory lifestyle. So there's got to be a better way to, and a better answer to this idea of sleep apnea than just relying on a CPAP machine. And what we know is that when we look at sleep apnea, really, when we look at the subluxations, it's the nerves that control that whole area, the nerves that control the sinuses, the back of the throat. And that's going to be the nerves that come right out of this C1, C3 area, right at the top of the spine, as well as the C6 to C7 area. We think of sleep apnea as being driven by chemical stresses. Remember, we talked about the 3 categories of stresses: mental, emotional, and the toxins or the chemical stresses, as well as the physical stresses or traumas. So when we talk about chemical stresses, that can come from inflammatory foods that can get into the body. So if we are eating an inflammatory lifestyle, right, inflammatory diet style, then that actually can increase the inflammation in these tissues, and that will push that sleep apnea. How many of you have ever had, you have a relative, Uncle Ralph, right? And when Uncle Ralph eats that pizza and beer, that snoring is much worse, right? I mean, maybe you had a situation like on a vacation or, in a lodge with somebody, right? And you're all sleeping in the same area, and you know that when the pizza and beer come out, that's going to drive that snoring much more. And that's because of the inflammation that comes from that. But that same inflammation can actually drive these subluxation patterns as well. So when we start to correct these subluxations, and we also stop recreating the subluxations by making improvements in the lifestyle, that's when we've helped so many people with sleep apnea. Thoracic outlet syndrome, this area of the spine here, this can be a place where a lot of people are tossing and turning at night due to pain and muscle soreness. They're restless, they wake up, they're not sleeping deeply, they can't find a comfortable position. And so if there's a thoracic subluxation in the upper back area, right, then remember, as the spinal cord comes down through the nervous system here, as the spinal cord comes down through the thoracic vertebrae, it's actually one of the narrowest parts. So here we have, look at this white area, this is the spinal cord coming down, and it goes all the way down the spine here, and it's the fattest right here, and then it turns into smaller and smaller ones down here, and they exit right down through the sacrum and then all the way around along here. The vertebrae at the top of the spine are small, very delicate vertebrae, the cervical vertebrae, and then the thoracic vertebrae are a little bit bigger, and the lumbar vertebrae are for weight bearing, so they're the biggest. And so as we come down through here, we have the area where it's the spinal cord is actually still fairly big, but the vertebrae are kind of small. And so that's where physical stresses can be driving this thoracic outlet syndrome, T5 to T9. That's the common areas. And if we actually allow the body to release the tension here and realign these vertebrae, so we're getting better nerve supply and less of that discomfort, then this is where people say, oh man, doc, I was like Dracula last night in my sleep. I was so deeply asleep, because there's finally ease in this middle area of the spine. And now we have the thoracic outlet syndrome. Moving right into restless leg syndrome, that jumpiness that happens when you're trying to sleep and then your leg is just all restless and jumpy. For this, we often find it's actually coming from the lumbar spine. This is the nerves that go down into the legs, the lumbars and the sacrum. And so what's interesting here about restless leg syndrome is if you have any irritation in the nervous system here, which is then the nerve supply down into the legs. Some people have sciatica, where they actually have pain going into their legs coming out of the lumbar spine and the sacrum area. But pain signals, as far as the twitch along the nerve that feels pain, it's a slow twitch. So it sends a signal in a slow rhythm, and when we're feeling pain. Whereas movement is a fast twitch signal in the body. And so oftentimes if the body is moving towards pain, it will try to overcome that with a fast twitch signal. So we will have restless leg as the body's way to try and reconcile what may be a pain signal that's trying to come through. So the body will move in order to override the pain signals. That's one of the theories behind restless leg syndrome. And so again, just correcting the restless leg area is one of the things that can actually improve. If we address the subluxations of that area, it improves restless leg, which then of course is going to result in better sleep. Now again, remember that when we look at these subluxations, there is interference with the vertebrae, meaning there's misalignment of the vertebrae. It can put pressure on the disc, which can then bulge out and put pressure on the nerve. The misalignment of the vertebrae itself can put pressure on the nerve, and it causes this nerve irritation and interference in your body's innate ability to heal and remain healthy. And so when you have the subluxations, many people want to know, well, what is it that causes these subluxations? And it is caused by traumas and jolting and jarring your spine, but also the bad habits. And those bad habits accumulate. In fact, I will tell you that it's the bad habits much more than the traumas that happen every now and then. And the bad habits include sitting, prolonged sitting, and then just check out the posture here with the sitting. Check this out. So not only might you have the blue light coming here that's going to impact the eyes at night, but you have this poor posture as well that's going to continue to promote those subluxations. So bad habits, sitting, tech stress, tech neck, those are the kinds of things, again, posturally, that can drive the cortisol levels and then keep affecting our sleep as well. And so again, how important is the posture? When that head is right up over the center of gravity, that's what we're designed for, where we will have a healthier spine. But if the head goes forward, it puts stress on the upper neck and the mid back and even down into the low back. And as the head goes forward, the effective weight of that head increases. So if you take a bowling ball and you hold it out in front of you, right, it's going to get heavier and heavier, even though the actual weight is different. The work you're going to do is harder. And as the head goes forward, look at how it increases the demand on our spines and on our nervous systems. And again, it's posturally related. So again, so important for us to have good spinal hygiene and healthy posture if we want to have a healthy nervous system. So what is it that we need to do if we have subluxations? How do we correct those, especially if they're affecting our sleep? If you are struggling with sleep, we want to, again, address breaking the bad habits, whether those bad habits involve your habits around screen time at night, not getting enough, not going to bed with early enough. It could be a social piece there. Or it could be that you have bad habits with your posture or bad habits with your diet where you're eating the inflammatory foods and so on. So we want to help people to break the bad habits. We want to help people to add specific exercises that are going to help the spine to be healthier, so the nerves going out to all the organs are healthier. And then that will, again, if the organs are healthier, it's going to help the hormones be healthier. And again, it's going to promote healthier rhythm between cortisol and melatonin. And then the chiropractic adjustments are key. So remember, if you're subluxated, the only way to correct this is with number 3, the chiropractic adjustments. Only a chiropractor is trained to find and correct subluxations, and it is very highly specific when we work with people. So we do a thorough exam to identify exactly where the subluxations are, and then we have an individualized protocol on how we're going to correct those subluxations for that person. In our office, we use very gentle techniques to correct the subluxation and just light touches along the spine that helps the brain to find where the patterns are, so the brain starts to make those changes in the alignment of the vertebrae. And once we realign and return that normal motion and that normal function to the spine, we start to see a reduction in stress and interference in the nervous system, a normalization of the nerve communication. And of course, that means now we're becoming more adaptable and more robust. So chiropractic care is safe and effective. It's actually the largest drug-free approach for health in the world. And millions of people have gotten adjusted and have been doing so for coming up on 125 years. So it's such an important part of making sure that you have a healthy body, but it actually has a very important role in making sure you get healthy sleep. So if you can't sleep, what's the solution? get adjusted, and then sleep well, right? And so best practices for sleep. Now, if you are someone that has been struggling with your sleep, and it may be many different factors. It may be that you have that think thing happening, right? Where you just can't get to sleep, or maybe that you wake up and can't get back to sleep. If you have a struggle with any of that, I would love to see if I could help you. And so all you need to do is just reach out to us. And what we'll ask you to do is, if you can just send us a text, and I'll give you the number to text to, and then we can set up a time for us to just talk it down and see whether or not we can help. There's no charge for that. We'll just schedule a 10 or 15 minute phone call, and we can see whether or not we can help. Now, I know a lot of people that are watching this, as you're watching it, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have family members and friends and coworkers that struggle with sleep. So I want you to know that this offer, it applies to them too. So if you know somebody that's struggling, I'd be happy to have a conversation with them, see whether I can help. There's no charge for that. I'm happy to just check in and see whether it's something that we can give you some recommendations so that you can get the sleep that you need, which is going to protect your health. Because if you're not taking care of your health, your sleep, it's going to affect your health. Because, you know, what do you want? How do you want to live your life? Just barely making it through, always running on empty? Or do you want to have full power that's going to drive the energy you need for the rest of your life, so you can live that big life that you have in store for yourself, that you want to be living? All right, now, if you're not sure whether or not you have subluxations, there are different ways that we determine that. And so in our office, we use instrumentation, meaning we actually have scans of the nervous system that will show us where there is damage, where there is interference to the nerves. And this is technology that's used by astronauts to measure their health. So we use it right there in our office. We also use motion palpation, feeling the motion in the joints to see where is it stuck, where there may be a subluxation, where those smart body muscles are strapping that down, trying to protect you. Static palpation will tell us whether or not the vertebrae are actually misaligned one way or the other. You could even put your hands on your own neck and start to feel your spine, see if it feels different on one side or the other. That could be actually an indication that there is a misalignment there and a subluxation. And then posture. So if you're finding that you're one of those people that has that poor posture, like if you're not paying attention, next thing you know, there you are in that poor posture, or someone you know is like that, it's actually something that could be affecting their health. So we use that as one of our measurement tools to determine what's happening in your nervous system. And at times we'll use x-rays as a way to really look inside and see what's happening there, see whether there's any deterioration or decay that's gotten a start, degenerative change. And so we use all of these tools to analyze exactly what the nature is of subluxations, if you do have them, and how correctable are they? Have we got it in time? Are we able to actually help you, or is it gone too far? So the exam is a very detailed exam. We also go through a full case history, so we really get to know what's your story. What are the things that have led to where you are right now? And that will help us also understand, what are your goals? What do you need to overcome? Where do you want to go with your life? What do you have for your health goals? And how can we help you reach those goals? So we like to pay close attention to that. And so if you're like me and you're curious about those kinds of things, then the next step is to either schedule a consultation with us so that we can actually check you, to have a conversation with you. But I also would like to offer to you that the usual cost of our new patient discovery process is $210. But for those of you that are watching this webinar, I want to make it easy for you. I want to offer it so that we can cap that number at 47. So instead of being 210, we're going to cap it at 47. So if you're curious about your spine or nervous system and the health and how it might be affecting your sleep, or someone you know, then please put in text to 802-985-9850. Go ahead and text to us the word sleep, and our team is going to reach out to you, and we're going to find a time that we can get you scheduled in so that we can actually check your spine and nervous system. And if you're not sure whether you want to come in for a session, please feel free to reach out, and we can also just schedule a time to talk. Now, if you happen to be watching this recording of this webinar, then please just message us here on the Facebook page. Send us a message that you watched the webinar and that you'd like to find a time for us to set up a time to talk. And of course, we'll reach out to you and we can get that scheduled for you as well. All right, so remember that one of the things that affects people's health is when they think, oh, maybe it'll go away, right? Ignore it, maybe it'll go away. Procrastination is the thief of health. So I know where these things go. If you're not getting good sleep, it is going to be affecting your health. And remember, even just 3 nights of not good sleep can actually be driving diabetes. So please don't procrastinate. Don't wait. I know where these things go, and I want to see if I can help. So please just text us. Let us know how we can help. We would love to see if we can. And again, of course, this would apply to friends and family, coworkers, neighbors, whoever you know that has talked to you about struggling with sleep. Let us see if we can help. We'd love to do that. All right, so that is our workshop this evening. I am going to just now open it up, and I'm going to stop the sharing of the screen here. And I want to just see whether or not I have folks on. Let's see, is Trevor on? I had one fellow who has been having great results with us, and he came in struggling to sleep. So let me just tell you his story. I think he wasn't able to stay on. But what's so interesting with his case is that he actually, I just want to make this big here. He actually was somebody that was struggling with that idea of the thoracic outlet, right? So he had a lot of pain in his neck and his upper back, and it was affecting his posture. And or rather, the posture was affecting him. It was actually a downward spiral. And so he noticed that his posture was getting bad. He had so much discomfort. He couldn't sleep. And it was affecting depression and his mood. And he was at his wit's end when he came in. And here we are just a few weeks into care with him. And not only is he feeling better, but his sleep is getting better. And you should just check, you should see the energy, right? His whole disposition is changing. His outlook on life is changing. And that's because we are correcting the subluxations, and he's getting better sleep, and it's affecting all of his function. So if you are struggling, please know that there is help that's available, and let us know how we can help. Thank you so much for joining us in our webinar this evening, and I look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And I'm going to close out tonight, and we're going to stop we're going to stop sharing, and we're going to stop recording. All right, we'll see you on the next webinar.